Good afternoon, everyone, and happy first Friday. Welcome to Milwaukee City Hall. My name is Emma Sagor. I am the city manager of this fantastic city, and it's my pleasure to be the introducer today for our speaker at today's State of the City address. So our speaker tonight is the wonderful Mayor Lisa Batey. Mayor Batey has lived in Milwaukee since 2002. Soon after moving here, she became active in the Island Station NDA and has served on the Citizens Utility Advisory Board. Lisa then served on the Planning Commission for 9 years before being elected a city councilor in 2015. She was sworn in as mayor in January of 2023. In addition to her elected office, she served on the boards of the North Clackamas Watersheds Council and Celebrate Milwaukee, Inc., and was one of the founding board members of the Milwaukee Parks Foundation. Mayor Batey is a tireless advocate for parks and green space, celebrating Milwaukee's stories past, present, and future, and making this community the best it can be. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mayor Batey.
Thanks everyone for coming, and thanks everyone who might be watching online at a later point in time. Before I launch into it, I just want to say last year I made the fatal error of promising to get people out in 30 minutes, which meant I ended up cutting a bunch of my speech. So I'm not promising to get you out in 30 minutes, but I am promising to get you out before 6, and I will take some questions at the end if people want to stick around and ask questions. Before I begin, I want to introduce the elected officials here today. So we have 2 members of our council. We have Council President Will Anderson here, and Councilor Robert Massey here. We also have joining us our Metro Councilor who represents all of us and much of Clackamas County, Christine Lewis, right here. I also want to thank Emma, her assistant city manager Joseph, and our recorder Scott Stauffer for all the logistics of this event and promotion of this event, and Scott in particular for putting together this slideshow, because all week I've been sending him 2 pictures this day and 2 pictures that day and put it all together, and he's done a great job. Before I begin, I also want to acknowledge that our community is located on the ancestral homeland of the Clackamas people. In 1855, the surviving members of the Clackamas signed the Willamette Valley Treaty, also known as the Kalapuya Etc. Treaty, with the federal government in good faith. We offer our respect and gratitude to the indigenous people of this land. And I will say, I have friends visiting, and we were at Shampooey today, and we went through the little visitor center there, which I recommend. It's got a lot of good history. It talked about how a bunch of 6 different treaties with 6 different groups of tribes were signed at Shampooey, and none of them were ratified by the federal government. So we've not done well by the indigenous people of this land. Later on, I will talk about a bit of hope in that regard. Scott is also has been leading us in a collaboration with the Grand Ronde Tribe, and so I'll talk about that a little bit more. So, state of the city. You know, Milwaukee is a work in progress. There's lots of good stuff happening, but also lots of room for improvement. I'll walk through some key topics: housing, economic development, transportation, and parks, and highlight some of our accomplishments, some of the things in the pipeline, and also touch on some of the challenges we face as a city and a community. Before I launch into those 4 topics, I want to set a little context. So I actually was elected in 2014, but I took office in 2015. And 2015, a decade ago, 2 big things happened in Milwaukee. Not things that I can take any credit for. They were set in motion 3, 4, 5 years before I ran for council, but the Orange Line opened in September of 2015. That was a game changer for Milwaukee. It brought a lot of great things to Milwaukee. It also contributed to our high housing costs in Milwaukee. And Milwaukee Bay Park, Phase 2. What you currently see as Milwaukee Bay Park, the boat ramp, the parking areas, and the big lawn, was Phase 2 of a 3-phase approach to building out Milwaukee Bay Park. And that was, yesterday was the 10-year anniversary of that dedication. I'm going to circle back to Milwaukee Bay Park later in the remarks as well. So the other bit of context I want to set is council goals. So our council has had, over the last several years, has set 3 goals every 18 months or 2 years. It's been different lengths of time, but we have held ourselves to 2 goals. If you go to some other cities in the metro area, they might have 7 goals or 8 goals or 10 goals, but our prior city manager was like, I can fund staff time to deliver on 3 goals. So really, you need to keep yourself to 3 goals. And for many years, one of those goals was implementing our climate action plan, and one of those goals was equity and social justice work. We all knew those were not things we were going to finish in 2 or 4 years. Those were ongoing work the city needed to do, and if we wanted to have other goals, we needed to find a way to fund those in our base budget to allow for other goals. So thankfully, last budget cycle, so we're almost midway through our budget cycle. Our budget cycle begins on July 1st of last year for a 2-year cycle. For that budget cycle, we were able to fund the climate and sustainability position and the equity and social justice position, and thus that opened the door for us to discuss 3 new goals. So in January, when our new council was seated, we had a retreat, and we landed on these 3 goals. And I'm going to talk about all of them in different ways. I'm not going to talk about them explicitly as goals, and I'm not going to read you the slide. You can read the slide. So I will just say that the way we're approaching the goals this year is each month staff is coming to us for a discussion of one of the 3 goals, so that we're going through each quarterly. And this Tuesday happens to be this Tuesday's work session, 4 p.m. upstairs, happens to be the Parks and Green Spaces goal, and also a presentation on the latest developments regarding the Kellogg Dam removal project. So anybody who's interested should come or watch us online for that. And then next month we will do economic development. Affordability. Oh, we already did it. Okay. Yep. All right. So with that, I'm going to turn to housing. Okay. So in 2016, Milwaukie did what's called a housing needs analysis. I think by, again, that's the year after light rail came in. I think we knew housing prices were going up. Not a lot of housing was being built between the 1990s and 2015. Not much housing was built in Milwaukie. And so we did what was called a housing needs analysis, and that's kind of a state mandated thing, but it's a count of how much housing you have and how much capacity you have for more housing. Between that 2016 housing needs analysis and the end of 2026, so a little bit more than a year from now, we will have added 1,400 housing units in Milwaukie. That is a 15% growth rate over a decade. So that's good. I think that's great. 1,000 of that is apartments, and 300 out of those 1,000 will be affordable apartments. We are seeing Milwaukee's, vacant farm plots and other infill places fill in. And we have started to see middle housing. So I don't know how many people know what I mean by middle housing, but traditionally cities in the US and certainly cities in Oregon were zoned that you had apartments here and you had single family houses here, and there wasn't much development potential for things like townhomes, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes. So in 2019, the state changed the law and required us to, sort of mandated that we allow that kind of development wherever we allow a single family home, we allow up to a fourplex. We are starting to see, we have a couple of cottage clusters under development. I'm hopeful that we'll see more townhomes. I mean, I started my adulthood on the East Coast where the townhome was the starter home. Everyone's starter home was a townhome, and we really don't have very many in Milwaukie. Anyway, we will have more middle housing coming. We have almost 500 more apartments in the pipeline. And luckily for us, the Hillside campus over by Providence Milwaukie Hospital is a place that is going to be affordable housing. We don't control the cost of housing. We can't just tell developers who buy a parcel, what they're going to build or what price point they're going to sell it at. And so, it's great for us that we have the partnership with Clackamas County and with Metro for building the Hillside development, which is being built, with the housing bond measure that voters voted on back in 2016, 17, something like that. So apart from Hillside, a lot of our housing is unaffordable to many in Milwaukee. And certainly, if you had a house you bought 20 years ago, you may be fine, but then your kids can't afford to stay in Milwaukee. So we established an affordability goal as one of our goals. Again, we can't mandate a lot of things about what housing costs, but we can try to use some tools to make things more affordable. So we are looking at some land banking. That's where the city buys the land and then controls who develops it. Also land trust ownership models. I'm going to show one of those in a minute, but that's an ownership model where a nonprofit owns the land and individuals own the homes, and it kind of keeps the pricing at a moderate profit level as they turn over. And so that's part of our affordability goal. Another part of our affordability goal is keeping our utility rates in, stable for people and trying not to have them go up in huge amounts. But so this is Short Stack Milwaukie. This is a land trust model. So this is a development of 15, 18 homes, cottages. It's a cottage cluster. Cottages going in on Harvey Street. They're actually under construction. They're up now, if you haven't been by. It is, like I said, it's a land trust model. So the Proud Ground, which is the Portland-based land trust, will own the land and will find buyers who income qualify to buy the homes. They're 2-bedroom homes. We also have phase 2. So what you see I should go back. What you see being built there, 3 buildings, is what we call phase 1 of Hillside. So this is the bigger, there will eventually be 500 units of housing at Hillside. This is the first 275. And so on the left of this picture, there will be future buildings that will start after this one finishes. But we had some good news recently that one of the developments being considered for inclusion in that phase 2 is what's called Bridge Meadows, which is a really great model. Former Mayor Gambo was a big advocate for it, of a community that brings together elderly folks and folks with kids out of the foster care system to create a mixed age community where they have common facilities and they have sort of build connections between the generations. And so I'm really excited about Bridge Meadow. And then the Short Stack is an example of the land trust. We have another piece of property the city owns over in the Island Station neighborhood that we refer to as the Sparrow site that we are also exploring for a land trust model. So hopefully to build some townhomes or some cottages that can be bought at affordable rates. What's affordable? Certainly 100 or 200,000 below what the market is building, right? We wouldn't have New Seasons, Freem, and other new businesses that we're getting if we weren't building more housing. I mean, that is really true. I think the apartments behind Milwaukie Marketplace had a lot to do with New Seasons deciding to come in. So I do think that more infill development, that more middle housing is a good thing for our community, for walkability, for seeing the businesses come that people want to see come. But we do have to balance that with livability for people who have been here and people who choose to live in a less dense neighborhood. The city does a survey. We do a lot of online surveys, but we do an actually professional survey company, statistically valid survey every couple of years, and it told us in 2023 that managing development was the area of least satisfaction among city residents. It's hard to get at what exactly, it's hard to know exactly what different respondents meant when they think of managing development, so there's a limit to how much you can read into that, but I do think it's a cautionary note, and we have to think about how the development we build, the traffic we bring with it, the parking woes that we bring with it affect livability. We've recently heard some concerns from the Hector Campbell neighborhood about a fourplex development going in their neighborhood, and City Council's got a lot of emails about that, and actually I think Emma's going to talk about that at our meeting on Tuesday. But I think it tells me that, and I will tell you, when the so Milwaukee had to implement this middle housing mandate from the state, and we had a package of code that we passed in 2021, I think 2021 or 2022. Oh, okay, I'm being told 22. It was in the spring, early summer of 22. I was actually I wasn't the mayor then, but I was the sole person who voted against it because of some of the parking issues then. Some of the parking issues in that package, getting rid of requiring parking. Since then, the state has actually done that for us. So we don't have a choice anymore in terms of requiring parking. But I do think what I take away from this sort of backlash that's coming out of these neighbors of some of these middle housing developments is we haven't really done our homework in explaining to the community what middle housing is. You're going to see it, and why it's it's a state mandate, and it is a benefit to the community largely. But how I think at the time there were some pilot articles about what is middle housing. There were some things that tried to get the word out there, but I do think we need to do more to explain to people, why this is, what you're going to see, and why, yeah. I think we haven't done a great job in our public conversation around middle housing, because it is a state mandate. It is also a good thing for the community largely, and so to segue, let me make sure I've gone through my slides. Okay, to segue from housing to economic development, I also want to say we are way overdue for conducting a historic inventory of properties in Milwaukee. We have not done that since the 1980s. In the typical, historic preservation rule is you look at buildings that are over 50 years old. Well, in the 1980s, the mid-century homes in Milwaukee were not 50 years old. So nobody was thinking about, is there anything there we should protect? Now, those houses are now 70 years old. They're plenty old. So should we, I really think we're way overdue for looking at what merits protection and regulation in our community, and we haven't done it since the 1980s. And I will say, we only have Freem and Keeper because we had a cool historic building that they wanted to go into. I am worried about, and we have some people trying to renovate the Antique Mall building. I am worried what's going to happen to the famous soda fountain that John F. Kennedy sat at. I think we have some other buildings in downtown, like Libby's, that have some historical significance, and I'm a little worried about what we're going to lose in the years ahead. So I think we do need to do some looking at our historic building inventory. So turning to economic development, I will say at a recent symposium of other mayors, like a bunch of Clackamas County mayors gave a talk, and I said, well, Milwaukee's the only main street with both a bookstore and a record store. and it is true, it's very exciting. So I don't have to say anything about that. Everyone knows that's been the game changer in downtown Milwaukee. We have new apartments here. We have, spoken word, B-side records and vintage, social studies, and soon to open Circus Gallery, which will be in the building in this archway between Keeper and Freem. There will be a gallery up there, so watch for that. I think she's probably just a couple weeks from opening. I want to really give kudos to the Downtown Alliance of Milwaukee, our new downtown business community that's pulled together. It's been since before COVID that Milwaukee really had a cohesive business community, so I'm really glad for that. There is also a second group called the Business of Milwaukee, which is kind of looking more broadly at Milwaukee, not just downtown. So it's great to have the businesses sort of organizing themselves and getting active. We have more apartments coming to the Chase Bank. Last time I drove by, it was coming down. I don't know if it's completely down yet, but we have some more apartments coming there. Pietro's is moving over to Milwaukee Marketplace. That is going to open up an opportunity in the short term for some more parking for downtown, which is good. But that will eventually be housing on that Pietro site. I do hope the new Milwaukee Marketplace, I don't know, probably most people don't pay attention to this, but Milwaukee Marketplace changed hands this spring. And I've seen some discussions online of what people would like to see there, and people saying, oh, we should have them try and get them to build a bike corral in the middle with some covered bike parking, which I think is an awesome idea. And that kind of gets me to our neighborhood hubs. We talk a lot about neighborhood hubs. We have some areas that are designated as neighborhood hubs already. We have some discussion about dedicating more. I think that, we have some things that operate as we don't call them our neighborhood hubs, but Milwaukee Marketplace is at the juncture of 2 or 3 neighborhoods. The King Road Safeway and all the shops around that are definitely a hub. The shops and things at King and Linwood are definitely a hub. The city, in my experience, in my 10 years, has never really engaged with the owners of these sites to talk about, or engaged to bring them together with those neighborhoods to talk about what the neighborhoods would like to see. So we do these surveys about neighborhood hubs, and they're all like, we want a pub, and we want a yoga studio, and we want this and that. Well, great. But why aren't those going into the existing hubs that we have? And how do we get that dialogue going? So I hope by making economic development a goal, we will start trying to foster those conversations between the city and the businesses, but also between the neighborhoods and the businesses. I think we have, anyway. Parking. Before I go, wait, I'm losing my track, sorry. So we have an urban renewal area, includes our downtown and out to Milwaukee Marketplace. You might have seen there's a new block of sidewalk done down Main Street a ways. That's kind of a test block. We will be upgrading some of the sidewalks and store frontages in downtown starting next year. Some McLaughlin intersection improvements, and some improved signage for downtown, trying to get people off of McLaughlin. I have had people tell me they didn't know there was a Main Street here. I drive down McLaughlin all the time. I had no idea that was there. I was like, there's a lot going on between the Downtown Alliance of Milwaukee and what the city is doing, and just the energy created by Freem. So I think the hard question we're going to have to confront in the coming year or two is parking. And do we have to have paid parking downtown? I think the day will come. It may not be here yet, but it will come, and we need to be prepared for that conversation. I do appreciate these parking signs. I kind of complained that it wasn't clear to people where they could park in downtown Milwaukee. I mean, people who walked the town knew kind of, but if you were coming in, it wasn't that well marked before. So I really appreciate these new signs that make it clear. I understand one of the downtown businesses, or the Downtown Alliance, is working on a map to like tell people where they can park. So it's all good. It still doesn't mean we won't be coming to paid parking one of these days. Economic development beyond downtown. So we have a storefront, we have a small grant program for businesses in downtown. We're going to expand that grant program for businesses in the rest of the city for things like storefront improvements and investments in equipment, or things that would advance their businesses. We're also looking to spend some staff time and some funds to activate some of those existing neighborhood hubs. 32nd Avenue around Milwaukie Cafe, but even, it's several blocks of 32nd Avenue has been designated as a neighborhood hub, or a neighborhood main street, I think is what we called it in the old code, for 15 years, and we haven't seen much happen there. So how do we catalyze that? How do we get something going there? And so I'm happy to say by making economic development a goal, we are going to invest some energy in some of those questions. And also in having some roundtable discussions with our bigger employment areas in North Milwaukee industrial area and the International Way area. Again, the city hasn't had a ton of engagement with those areas over the years, and I think it's time for us to have a more regular and systematic engagement with those business areas. So I'm looking forward to that. Okay, transportation. So we have a lot of transportation projects underway, wrapping up, about to start. So I'm going to walk through a few of those. I will say personally, it's funny. I've thought most of our transportation projects went really fast and just happened really smoothly. And then there's the one that's a route that I travel all the time. And now, it seems to have taken forever. So the Washington Street project, which to me feels like it's been going on for 2 years, is going to wrap up this fall. The sidewalks are looking awesome. We did have someone come to City Council a few months ago and say, "Are you going to pave the darn street?" And yes, we are going to pave the street, but you got to do all the rest of it first. So watch for Washington Street to wrap up by September. And I want to give a shout out to something that comes out once a month to the City Council in one of our City Council packets called the Community Development Report. And actually, Joseph Brilio, who wears a hat as our Community Development Director at the moment, as well as Assistant City Manager, edits that. It's a great document for learning the latest on transportation, building of apartments, sidewalks, all the projects. So I really encourage people to look. Right now it's in our work session packet for the second meeting of each month, but I'm trying to get Joseph to put it somewhere easier for people to find, because that's not if you're not a real City Council nerd who reads our packets, you're not going to find it. So, but it's a great tool. I do think it goes out to some of the neighborhoods and things, and it's really a great tool for tracking what's going on, Other sidewalk and street projects are in the Ardenwald neighborhood this year. The North Ardenwald, which is sort of up around Sherritt Street and the north end of 29th, that's underway. And Harvey Street, actually near that short stack development that I showed, is coming late summer. ODOT will be repaving Highway 224 and building a safer crossing at Monroe as part of the Monroe Greenway. For those who don't know, the Monroe Greenway is a bicycle and pedestrian route from downtown along Monroe Street all the way to the east side of the city. It's coming in phases over the next few years, but getting a safer crossing of 224 is an important piece of the Monroe Greenway, and that's going to be starting this summer. The city itself paves, does some paving every summer. We do what we call slurry sealing, which is a kind of treatment that happens of the streets that aren't too bad yet, and they can kind of be preserved by putting this sealant on, and then we have the actual repaving, grind and inlay. So we're doing 4.3 miles of slurry sealing and 4.7 miles of grind and inlay this summer. And I raised that, I mean, we do that every year, and the people who happen to live where that happens usually love it. You know, it's an inconvenience for a couple days, but they really are usually very happy. You're gonna hear on the state level a conversation this year about transportation funding. And there's a lot of people, you know, so there's a proposal out, you've maybe seen it in the news, that calls for a higher gas tax, a tax on vehicle registration, a tax on bicycles, you know, a wide range of taxes and fees to raise more money for transportation. It's important. I just want people to understand that the city benefits from that as well as the state, you know, ODOT and state and big projects. That funding is divided 50% to the state, 30% to the counties, and 20% to the cities. So if that package, and I'm not going to predict what that package will ultimately look like, there will be a lot of wrangling in Salem over that in the next 5 or 6 weeks. But whatever comes out of that package, you know, 20% of that, you know, then apportioned by population, of course, comes to Milwaukie. And it is money for us to do things like repaving the city streets. It would be very beneficial because actually complaints about the condition of city streets are things council hears quite regularly. Oh yeah, I had an example. So gas tax, you know, back in, and I appreciate our finance director looked this up for me. Back in 1994, the gas tax was 7.7% of our general fund. So our general fund is the budget for most things in Milwaukie. Things like utilities have their own funds, but the general fund is what funds the police department, or what funds the library, it's what funds planning and all these things. So gas tax used to be 7.7% of the general fund. 30 years later, the gas tax is 3.5% of the general fund. So it is quite reduced. Of course, some of that is EVs, some of that is more efficient cars, but a lot of that is just that Oregon has grown, and so that pie of gas tax money is cut so many more ways. Milwaukee's not a fast-growing community, so our piece of the statewide gas tax pie has gotten smaller and smaller over the years. So the transportation package, I think, is important for us, and I encourage people to follow what goes on in Salem. But I am hopeful that the legislature will adopt a package that will help preserve our infrastructure for future generations, because it is a challenge. And I wanted to know how many, let me see, what have I, okay, oh, no, go back. The TSP, who knows what the TSP is? Okay, about half the room maybe? Okay, the Transportation System Plan, it's a thing, I was involved in 2007 in the last major overhaul of the TSP. It is where the city describes the current conditions and then figures out what the desired future conditions are and needed infrastructure is in all forms of transportation. So it's roads, it's railroads, it's freight, it's moving freight for the business areas, it's bikes and pedestrians. So there has been a project going on for over a year now to update our transportation system plan. Council President Anderson serves on the advisory committee. They'll be meeting in May, but watch for more outreach this summer. There will be some public outreach. There will be some things going on on Engage Milwaukie. For those who don't know about Engage Milwaukie, it's engage.milwaukeeoregon.gov. It is where the city does a lot of both sharing information about projects as well as surveying people, asking people for input. So I encourage you to follow Engage Milwaukie. I mean, I think just like what I said about middle housing and whether we'd done enough outreach and people not really knowing what's coming, I really hope people engage in the transportation system plan so that nobody a year from now, after it's adopted, is surprised and says, what do you mean you're going to build this? Or what do you mean that's a high priority? That shouldn't be a priority. So I encourage you to engage on the transportation system plan. We have gotten some critique from City Council has gotten some letters and some critique that the Transportation System Plan Advisory Committee is too loaded with bicycle advocates, and that people who drive cars aren't being, their needs aren't being considered. So again, I encourage you to tune in, tell your neighbors to tune in, weigh in at the appropriate times. Because I do think we want to hear from everyone, and people with mobility needs, and people who use mobility devices and things like that. So please tune in to the transportation system plan. So parks and green spaces. In March, we dedicated 3 new neighborhood parks. It was super exciting. It was a lovely day for early March. Those 3 parks were funded with ARPA money, thanks to former Representative Karin Power and our state Senator Kathleen Taylor, who got us the bulk of that money. There was some other money that staff pulled in as well, but the bulk of it was the ARPA money. It was really exciting to have the 3 new parks open. In other park news, we have the what we call the 3 First Fish Herons project, and that's what I alluded to with the Grand Ronde Tribe. So in Milwaukie Bay Park, and I think you'll see them go up this winter. I'm getting a fingers crossed from Scott in the back of the room. You will see bases, plinths or stone bases for sculptures, and the Grand Ronde Tribe is going to run a competition among tribal artists for heron sculptures, because the heron coming to the river is the sign that the fish are coming up the river, right? And so it's a certain seasonal thing in the spring for the tribe of welcoming the first fish, the herons, as the sign of the first fish coming up the river. So we're really excited to have that project take off, and we're hopeful that we'll have some art along our waterfront next year. A few years out, we're trying to get rid of that damn dam, that Kellogg Dam. It's thanks to Metro, it's been, we've got to start on the funding mechanism to remove the dam and revegetate what will be 13 acres of new green space behind what's now a muddy, mucky, I always call it a lake. Everyone else calls it a lake, but the people involved in the project call it the impoundment, because it is not a healthy lake. It is not a healthy ecosystem for most aquatic creatures. Anyway, it's moving and it's super exciting. There's a lot of questions about the federal funding and the new regime, but we're plowing ahead and hoping to have that dam removed. And for those who don't know, I mean, I meet people all the time who don't even know there's a dam there. I'm like, you drive over it every day on 99E. And so I take people down there to show them. When the dam comes out, the new bridge will accommodate a pedestrian underpass. So from the South Downtown Plaza, from Washington Street and the food cart pod and the Max station, you'll be able to come down and go under McLaughlin and not have to cross McLaughlin. And I think people are really excited about that as an option, an opportunity. Plus, of course, the 13 acres of new green space. So super exciting to see that project moving, and we will do all we can to keep it moving. And then, of course, there's Milwaukie Bay Park, which, yeah. So I gave you the picture earlier of 10 years ago when we dedicated phase 2 of Milwaukie Bay Park. This is the design for the final phase, an amphitheater, a play area, a picnic area, a splash pad, more paths, more trees. This says refinement April 2022, but really the outlines of this date from April of 2019. So they're 6 years old. We thought we would be building this by now. We have been in a stalemate with North Clackamas Parks and Recreation District and the county commissioners over that for several years. But this year they have come back to the table to talk about it. So I am cautiously optimistic. How things go in the next few months by midsummer will tell us if we can find a way forward. But again, I am cautiously optimistic that we can get the Milwaukie Bay Park project going again. And then just a couple things I wanted to acknowledge as sort of accomplishments that don't fit in any of the 4 topics I've had. Ledding Library is our first after-hours cooling center on the very hottest days. So, you know, there's certain thresholds, but when it's going to be super hot, we keep it open until 10 o'clock. We have staff, and I volunteered, a lot of staff put in the time to staff it, provide people with cold drinks, you know, some food, and for people who don't have air conditioning or are living on the street or for whatever reason need a place to cool off on the hottest days. So last year we had it open about 8 days, yeah. And so we'll be doing that again this summer. I want to really thank St. John's Episcopal Church, which is going to open our first wintertime warming shelter, overnight warming shelter for the coldest nights in the winter. We have people living on the street in Milwaukie and surrounding areas, and we really don't have a warm weather shelter or warming shelter in this part of the county. Everyone has to go to Oregon City, so it's really great that St. John's Episcopal has stepped up to do that. And another super exciting thing, you may have seen, if you drive up Monroe or 224, you may have seen the old YMCA daycare has a fence around it, and it is going to be a new Head Start center. Yeah, it's super exciting. I've seen the plans. I mean, they're using the same building, but that building is like 50 years old, and it needs a lot of updates. But they got money from the state as well as the federal government to fund both the purchase of that and the upgrades. So they are launching into that. I think they were hoping to be open for school this fall. It's not 100% clear it's going to come off quickly enough, but they will open at some point later this year. Okay, so that brings me to the challenges part of the discussion, and the budget, financial challenges. So I said we adopted our budget. It went into effect July 1 of last year. It's what the city manager calls the hold the line budget, which means every department is kept to the same amount of funding they had the 2 years before. So that essentially means they had a budget cut, because we all know everything is more expensive than it was 2 years before. So we managed to, get a budget out, fund our climate position, fund our equity position, and not have to lay anybody off. But if you've been watching the news, a lot of cities and counties are facing having to lay people off and cutting budgets. Just this week, Washington County proposed a $26 million budget cut, eliminating 83 jobs. Beaverton had a $10 million shortfall. Portland Public Schools has a $40 million shortfall and is expecting to cut a large number of jobs. We have some tough conversations to have in the coming year about revenue and about what level of service the people in the community want and what people are willing to pay for. Oregon has this, I have a long talk about Oregon's tax system, but I've already talked for 45 minutes, so I'm going to cut it short and just say the Oregon property tax system is broken. Your schools, your counties, and your cities are all having to operate on 3% increase per year, which we all know does not keep us up with rises in inflation, rises in the cost of benefits for staff, et cetera. So we do have some hard conversations to have ahead about revenue. And in fact, we're going to kick them off on May 12th at our Budget Committee meeting. But it will be, I think, an ongoing conversation through much of the rest of this year. In closing, to hit on a theme I've mentioned several times today, please stay tuned to